Today we are going to use stamps that we make ourselves. We are going to need scissors, a pen, a ballpoint pen, or a pencil, or both. I go back and forth between the two. We're going to need some markers. We want to make sure these are washable markers, not alcohol-based. So that would be like a Sharpie would be alcohol-based. We want to use water-based markers. So Crayolas or your normal everyday markers are usually water-based. If you want to, you can add some crayons in there. Mostly what we need today is a styrofoam tray. We can get these from takeout food and cut them up into small squares. We can get them from the trays that our meat comes on or fish. Mom or dad or grandma can wash this out in soap and bleach and make sure it's really good and clean before we start working with it for crafts. Then we're going to be making our own stamps out of this styrofoam. So I made a bee and some flowers and a leaf to make this. You will also need a sponge that you can wet the paper with and a spray bottle of water if you have one. This is helpful. If you take your tray and you cut off these raised edges so all you have is a flat surface, then we're going to be able to draw on that flat surface. I start on paper and then I just trace through that paper onto the styrofoam. You can use a ballpoint pen that presses down, or you can just use a pencil like what I'm doing, and you are tracing over all of your lines, and those will be the places that are pressed down, and anything raised up will be what stamps or what prints. So it's important that once we start tracing our lines, that our paper doesn't move around on top of that styrofoam. So we need to use some tape. It doesn't matter what kind. It could even be duct tape, whatever you have around the house. And we're going to tape down our surface so that it doesn't slide around. I might want to be able to move my whole drawing so that when I'm tracing over my lines, I can move them, as long as your paper is not shifting around on top of your styrofoam. So to do that, I am going to make sure that none of my drawings are going to be hanging off the side, off the edges, that everything's fitting on my styrofoam. And then I'm just going to tape it so that it stays where I want it through the whole tracing process. When I begin to press through, I want to make sure that I do not push so hard that I tear the paper. I want to press over my lines and I can gently lift up and see how deep those lines are going. If you use a different type of tool, you might get a different pressure. So if I switch to a ballpoint pen, it looks like a deeper line than when I was getting with the pencil. So my pencil line's making a wider line. So once you've traced over all your lines, I want to be gentle about how I remove this so that I can check to make sure all of my lines look like they've gone deep enough. So I'm only going to remove part of the tape. I'm going to keep these taped so that if I need to replace it down, I can tell easily where to place it. So to me, it looks like those lines of the yellow and black did not show up very well, so I'm going to go over those again. You can place your drawing back down and retrace over it, or if you can see well enough where your lines are, you can remove your drawing and write directly on this styrofoam. So now I'm going to cut out around the edge of my bee and make this into a stamp. Those antennae are pressed down and they won't show unless they were sticking up, they would show. So I might choose to just cut them off, or I could choose to leave a space around the antenna on my stamp. Now all of these scraps can become their own little stamps. I can make flowers, stamp those down onto my paper, and then have the bee flying above the flowers. Now we're going to get our markers and color in just like you were doing a coloring page. So what we want to do is reactivate that marker with water. So I'm going to spray the bee. I'm also going to wet my paper so that when I stamp, that marker will be reactivated by the water. I'm wetting my paper with a sponge that is not dripping wet. It is just damp. And I'm going to go both directions. I want my paper to be wet, but not dripping. Now I'm going to give my bumblebee a little spray to reactivate that marker and press him down. I don't want him to slide around on the paper. I just want it to press once. But I need to go over all the spots to make sure those are pressing down really well. So one hand is holding the bee while the other hand smooths. Then I can switch. Now my right hand is holding the bee so it doesn't slide around on the paper while my left hand smooths. Okay. Now let's try some of the stamps I made that were flowers. I made a rose, another little, I don't know, maybe it's a lily, and a leaf. So those will be my next stamps that I'm going to add under my bee. So let's color those in. The stamps that are smaller, you're working faster, and so the marker's not drying out. So I might not even have to spray this one. Let's see, because I worked really fast. Pressing down without sliding it around on my paper. And picking straight up. So now, if you're able to move really fast on your markering, you may not need to add water. The bee was much bigger and took a lot longer of time, so the marker was more dried out. Now here's my rose. I was really fast and my marker's not dried out yet. I'm going to do a few more colors. Now, if I mixed purple and orange, they're across from each other on the color wheel, and so I would probably get some muddy color. So I wouldn't want to go right in with another color. If it was in the same color family, like a red is a neighboring color on the color wheel. So if I just used orange on this stamp, I could switch to red and not have to wash it off. If I wanted to switch to purple, though, I could certainly wash my stamp in the sink, washing all that marker off and then just using a different color. Here's my red. I'm pressing so hard, I wonder if it's going to stick to my finger when I lift up. Ooh. Let's make more roses. So let's make a new flower. I'd like to make a daisy. I'm doing a lot of punching through, poking holes, then I'm dragging my pen back through those holes. Those holes become like a guide of where my pen is going to travel. If you would like to draw this on paper first, go for it and then trace it. Or if you want to just freehand it like I am doing right now, that's okay. We have other scraps that came from around our bumblebee. And if I mess up on this, that's fine. I can start again. Now I'm going to cut out the spaces between, keeping your scissors away from your body and turning your styrofoam, not turning your scissors. And right now what I'm doing is lining up the edge, the point of my scissor. I don't want it to cut past that V, and so I'm not placing my scissors. I'm not placing them this far up. I'm keeping them backed out. Now that will only work on really strong scissors. If your scissors are not strong and you need to use back here because it's a stronger part of the scissor, just be very careful not to close past where that V shape, where those petals are meeting. Turning my styrofoam and not my scissors. Now let's make this one, I said it was going to be a daisy, but to me it looks like it could be a violet. I'm going to make it purple. Now if I'm working really quickly, I don't have to wet this again. And I can tell by my paper here it's curled, so it's still a little damp. I could go back and add other parts to this. It doesn't have to all be stamped. I can give some stems, but I did make a leaf stamp. So here's my leaf. I'm going to do this a few times. And I'm going to change the direction so that it doesn't always look like the same exact leaf. Adding some variety adds interest to my art. I'm going to keep my good stamps in this little yogurt container over here so that it doesn't get mixed up with my scraps. My hands are getting pretty colorful from the marker, but that's all right. I'm going to wash my hands really well when I'm done. Maybe I could give some grass. I could give edges and antenna with markers because not everything shows up on the stamp. Maybe I want to give some edges. I can do dotted lines or dashed lines. I can do zigzag lines. Remember to do different types of lines because those can show movement and action. Maybe I want it to look like my bumblebee is flying, and I can add a swooping line, a swirly line. Maybe this space looks a little empty to me, so I'm going to make another flower, a bigger flower. I don't have blue in here yet, so I'd like to add some blue. I want to give a lot of variety, have things look all kind of different. Whoops, I forgot to cut out my petals. What happens when I don't cut them out? Let's experiment. Ooh, as long as I do a good coloring job, I don't have to cut all my petals out. I'm going to make a few more of these blue flowers because I don't want blue just on one spot. I want to add some blue over here. I think I want to spread my purple and my blue out. So I'm going to make a blue flower over here. Oh, my paper's starting to dry out. I should either re-wet my stamp by spraying it before I stamp. What would happen if I got my paper wet again? I think the markers might bleed out. And I don't want to ruin this drawing that well, it's not really a drawing, but my artwork. I don't want to ruin that by getting that wet again. So I'm using purple right over top of the blue without washing my stamp, but those are neighbors on the color wheel, so that's okay. I can either stamp it down and see what happens because it's an experiment, or I can get this wet, but I want to move my artwork. I want to hold my spray bottle far away from my stamp so that I'm not right up here. If I sprayed it right up here, it would be a big puddle and my marker would probably run. So I want to keep it a very fine mist of spray. That means holding it back far away. I can see that marker change when it gets wet. Now I'm going to stamp over here, being careful not to let my stamp slide around. Now that flower is awfully close to the ground. Maybe I can imagine that it was leaning over. Maybe the wind blew really hard and those ones leaned over and hit the garden. Some of my leaves are stamps. Some of my leaves are drawn. Do I spy anything missing? I think that I should go in with some centers to my flowers. Now I want to leave some space up top because I really want to practice my letters up top, but I need to make sure my artwork dries first. If I put my hand here and this was wet, I might drag through and smear and smudge all of my beautiful artwork. So I'm going to just take a break and lay something on this so that it dries flat. And I'm going to come back when my artwork is dry. All right, I'd like to practice my letters, and I'm going to start with a pencil. Then I can trace over my pencil lines with marker. So mine is going to say B. That's how we would normally write B if I were talking about something that we were doing. Be happy. But when we're talking about the animal bee, it has an extra E on it. Be grateful. Exclamation point. So I'm kind of making a little bit of a joke because be grateful is how I would normally write it, but it's talking about a bee. So I'm going to change that. Now I'm going to find my black marker. You can choose any color you want. And I'm going to practice my letters, and I'm going to add something really fancy to my letters at the end. Be grateful. Now I'm going to add some swirls to match the loop-de-loop that the bumblebee was doing. So I would like to take this bee and add lots of beautiful swirls to it. Now I'm going to do that on my F and my L. Maybe my T. I can give it some more loops. What else needs a loop? Maybe the G. Whoops, that's okay. Now I want to erase my pencil lines. And I would like to add some crayons to this. It's all marker so far. And so if you have crayons or color pencils, maybe you can use something different, because when we change things and add variety to our coloring, it makes it look more interesting. I'm trying to keep all my lines going in the same direction. So all I'm doing is moving my hand back and forth, and I'm dragging my hand as it does that back and forth, back and forth. Practice doing some coloring with all your lines going in the same direction. That helps you gain control in your hands. Now, the blue is going to be above and below this, so I can go right through that. It's kind of like a controlled scribble.